I never thought I would be writing this post, but recent events have left me feeling lost and betrayed. This is going to be long, so please bear with me. I need to give you the full picture to understand why I am so hurt and angry with my family. I, 28F, am the oldest of 2 children in what I once thought was a close-knit family. My brother Jerome, 25M, has always been the golden child, a role that became apparent from our earliest years. Growing up, the contrast in how our parents treated us was stark and painful. While I was expected to maintain perfect grades, help with household chores, and behave impeccably, Jerome could do no wrong in their eyes. Our childhood set the pattern for our entire lives. I remember when I was 12, I spent months saving my allowance to buy a new bike. Jerome saw it, wanted it, and threw a tantrum. Our parents made me give it to him, saying I needed to learn to share with my little brother. This was just one of countless incidents where my needs and feelings were sacrificed for Jerome's wants. Despite this unfair treatment, I threw myself into my studies and extracurricular activities. I worked part-time jobs throughout high school and college, saved money, and graduated with honors. Jerome, meanwhile, spent his high school years partying and barely passing his classes. Our parents always defended him, saying he was just more free-spirited and creative than me. Jerome attempted college 3 times at expensive private universities, all paid for by our parents. He dropped out each time, usually within the first semester, claiming the schools weren't the right fit or the professors didn't understand his potential. He never held a job for more than a few months, always quitting because the work was beneath him or his bosses were too demanding. Through it all, he lived rent-free at our parents' house, spending his days playing video games and nights partying with friends. 5 years ago, after working in marketing for several years and building up savings and contacts, I started my own agency. The first 2 years were incredibly challenging. I worked 80-hour weeks, lived in a tiny studio apartment, and put everything I had into making the business successful. During this time, my parents constantly pressured me to hire Jerome. They claimed working for his big sister would give him the motivation he needed to succeed. I repeatedly refused, knowing his poor work ethic would damage my company's reputation with clients. 3 years ago, when my business finally started turning a profit, I helped my parents with some home repairs and medical bills. They were approaching retirement age, and I wanted to ensure they were comfortable. Looking back, I realized this was when Jerome started viewing me as a potential source of funding for his schemes. Last year, my parents called me crying. They had made a decision that would change all our lives. They had remortgaged their house and emptied the retirement accounts to help Jerome start his own business venture. They handed him $175,000 for what he claimed would be a revolutionary tech startup. Jerome had no business plan, no experience in tech, and no idea what he was doing. I tried desperately to warn them. I even brought over a friend who works in venture capital to explain why Jerome's vague ideas weren't viable. They dismissed all our concerns, saying I was just jealous of Jerome's entrepreneurial spirit. To absolutely no one's surprise except my parents, Jerome's business failed spectacularly within 6 months. He never even properly registered the company or kept basic financial records. The money vanished into expensive gaming equipment, which he later sold for pennies on the dollar, lavish dinners, weekend trips with his friends, and what he called networking events but were really just parties. My parents were devastated and faced losing their house. Despite my anger at their foolish decision, I couldn't bear to see my parents become homeless. I stepped in and started paying their mortgage to prevent foreclosure. I also covered their groceries, utilities, and medical expenses. It was a huge financial burden on my business, but they were my parents, and I felt responsible for them. Jerome, showing his true character, moved in with his girlfriend and barely contacted them except to ask for more money. The situation reached a breaking point 3 months ago. My parents called asking for additional money, claiming they needed emergency house repairs. When I asked for contractor quotes, they made excuses and seemed evasive. Something about their behavior felt off, so I drove to their house unannounced one weekend. What I found was worse than I imagined. Jerome had moved back in, bringing his girlfriend and 3 of his unemployed friends. They had transformed my parents' once beautiful home into a perpetual party house. There was destruction everywhere, holes punched in walls, broken furniture, beer-stained carpets, and windows covered in sheets because the curtains had been torn down. My parents, the homeowners, were relegated to living in their small guest room while Jerome and his friends took over the main house. When I confronted my parents about the situation, they broke down and admitted they had been giving the extra money I sent them to Jerome. Apparently, he was starting another business venture and just needed some startup capital. It was the same old story, but this time with my money. I was beyond livid. I told them I would no longer support them financially if they continued enabling Jerome's destructive behavior. Their response showed me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. Instead of acknowledging the problem, they turned on me completely. My mom said I was just angry because Jerome was brave enough to pursue his dreams while I played it safe with my boring marketing business. She said Jerome had vision and ambition, while I was just a conformist who would never understand true entrepreneurship. My dad was even worse, calling me selfish and reminding me that family should support each other unconditionally, though apparently, this rule only applied when the support flowed toward Jerome. I gave them an ultimatum: either Jerome and his freeloading friends move out, or I stop paying their bills. They could be loving parents who made a mistake, or they could be Jerome's enablers, but they couldn't be both anymore. They chose Jerome without hesitation. My mom said I was heartless for trying to kick out my own brother when he was working so hard on his business plans. My dad called me a terrible daughter for abandoning them in their time of need. So I did what I should have done years ago: I cut them off completely. I blocked their numbers and stopped paying their bills. My extended family is divided on the issue. Some understand my position and agree that my parents' enabling has to stop. Others think I'm cruel for not helping my parents in their old age, saying I'm punishing them just because I'm jealous of the attention Jerome receives. But I refuse to keep enabling this toxic family dynamic. I won't set myself on fire to keep them warm while they pour gasoline on the flames. Update 1 first, I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post. Your support and validation helped me stay strong during what turned out to be an even more difficult situation than I originally described. A lot has happened in the past 2 weeks, and I need to share these developments. The day after I posted, my aunt, Mom's sister, called me. We were never particularly close, so I was surprised to hear from her. She revealed something that made my blood run cold: Jerome had been systematically spreading horrible lies about me to our entire extended family for months. He created an elaborate story about how I had allegedly stolen money from our parents' business accounts years ago, which was why they needed his help now. According to his lies, I had embezzled over $200,000 from their small home-based business they ran before retirement, and they were too ashamed to report me to the police. Jerome went even further, claiming my current success was built entirely on stolen money. He told everyone that my marketing agency was failing, and I was trying to force them to kick him out so I could sell their house and keep the money before my business collapsed. He painted himself as the protective son trying to save our parents from their manipulative, criminal daughter. These allegations were completely false. Not only did I never have access to my parents' accounts, but their home business had been a small crafting venture that never handled more than a few $1,000s a month. The timeline of his lies didn't even make sense. I was already successful in my career before starting my own agency. But some relatives believed Jerome without question. My aunt showed me a family group chat where he had been spreading these rumors. The messages from my relatives were horrifying, calling me a thief, a disgrace to the family, and saying I belonged in jail. What truly broke my heart wasn't Jerome's lies. I expected nothing better from him. It was discovering that my parents were actively supporting his false narrative. They had been telling relatives that they couldn't deny Jerome's claims about me stealing from them. When asked directly about the alleged theft, they would say things like how deeply hurt they were by my actions and how Jerome was helping them recover from what I had done to them. My own parents were helping my brother destroy my reputation to maintain their fantasy of Jerome as the good son. Several relatives had been harassing me with angry messages for weeks, calling me horrible names and demanding I return the money I supposedly stole. Some even threatened to report me to the authorities. My aunt finally realized something was off about Jerome's story and reached out to hear my side. She apologized for initially believing him and for participating in the harassment campaign. I consulted a lawyer about the defamation, bringing printouts of the group chat messages and the threatening texts I'd received. While the lawyer confirmed I had a strong case, pursuing legal action would be expensive and time-consuming, potentially taking years to resolve. It would also mean staying entangled with my toxic family through a lengthy court battle. Instead, I decided to fight fire with fire. I spent an entire weekend gathering evidence, years of financial records showing every payment I had made to support my parents, text messages from Jerome admitting to wasting their retirement money, and emails from my parents begging for help with bills. I had documented everything meticulously, a habit I developed from running my own business. I created a detailed timeline with all this evidence and shared it with the entire extended family. I included bank statements showing exactly how much money I had given my parents over the years, nearly $80,000 in just the past year alone. I showed how they had funneled most of that money to Jerome, even after his business failure. I added recent photos of the damage Jerome and his friends had done to the house, including dated pictures showing the decline of the property since they moved in. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Many relatives who had believed Jerome's lies were horrified and apologized to me. Some were furious at how my parents had squandered their retirement savings on Jerome's schemes while villainizing me for trying to help them. My uncle, who had been one of my harshest critics, drove 6 hours to their house to confront Jerome about his lies in person. But instead of admitting defeat when faced with irrefutable evidence, my parents doubled down in the most hurtful way possible. They sent a group message to the entire family accusing me of trying to turn everyone against Jerome out of jealousy and spite. My mom said I was dead to her for betraying family secrets and trying to ruin Jerome's reputation just as he was getting his life together. My dad claimed I was destroying the family's reputation by airing our dirty laundry, and that a good daughter would have handled things privately. The worst part was their complete denial of reality. In their narrative, Jerome's failed business wasn't a failure, it was just temporarily paused. The damage to their house wasn't destruction, it was normal wear and tear from young people living their lives. The money they gave him wasn't enabling, it was investing in his future. They had an excuse for everything, always twisting reality to maintain their image of Jerome as the misunderstood genius and me as the jealous sister. I know I made the right choice in exposing the truth, but it hurts more than I can express to see how far my parents will go to defend Jerome's lies. They would rather destroy their relationship with me forever than admit Jerome is not the person they pretend he is. I've decided to maintain strict no contact with them and Jerome. Some relatives think I should forgive them since they're still my parents, but I can't trust people who would help destroy my reputation to protect their golden child. The family loyalty they demand only seems to flow in one direction, toward Jerome. Update 2. I wasn't planning to update again, but something major happened that I need to share. The situation with my family has taken several unexpected turns, and I'm still processing everything I learned. Last week, I received a frantic call from my aunt at 2 a.m. She was in tears, telling me my parents' house was being foreclosed on, and they had nowhere to go. Apparently, Jerome and his friends had disappeared weeks ago after a huge fight, leaving behind catastrophic damage to the property. The neighbors had been complaining about constant noise and suspicious activities, and the police had been called multiple times. When the bank inspector came to assess the property, they found extensive damage beyond what I had seen in my last visit. Jerome and his friends had apparently tried to set up some kind of cryptocurrency mining operation in the basement, causing dangerous electrical issues. They had knocked down several walls without permits, claiming they were renovating to create an office space. There was black mold growing in multiple rooms from water damage they had never reported. The house was essentially uninhabitable. My aunt begged me to help them one last time. She said my parents had finally hit rock bottom and realized their mistakes. According to her, they had been asking about me constantly, expressing deep regret for choosing Jerome over me. They wanted to apologize and make amends. Against my better judgment, and after much persuasion from my aunt, I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, her house. When I arrived, I barely recognized my parents. My mom had lost a concerning amount of weight, and my dad looked like he had aged a decade. They both broke down crying as soon as they saw me. Through their tears, they finally admitted to everything. Jerome had been manipulating them for years in ways I hadn't even known about. Whenever they tried to set boundaries or say no to his demands, he would threaten to cut contact completely. He played on their deepest fears, promising they would never see their future grandchildren. He told them that if they didn't support his dreams, they were choosing me over him and proving they never really loved him. When they hesitated to give him money, he would disappear for weeks, only to return with elaborate stories about business opportunities that would make them all rich. But the biggest revelation came when my mom confessed the real reason they had always favored Jerome. The truth went back to before I could even remember. When I was a baby, their marriage was falling apart. My dad had been having an affair with a coworker and was planning to leave. They were in the process of discussing divorce when my mom discovered she was pregnant with Jerome. They saw Jerome's unexpected conception as a divine sign that they should stay together. After he was born, their marriage improved, and they credited him with saving their family. They spent the next 2 decades trying to repay that perceived debt by giving him everything he wanted, even at my expense. They convinced themselves that any sacrifice was worth it because without Jerome, our family wouldn't exist. This explanation made me feel even worse than before. They had sacrificed my childhood happiness and emotional well-being to repay Jerome for something he had no control over, something that happened before he was even born. Their guilt over almost divorcing led them to create a monster through endless enabling, and I was just collateral damage in their decades-long attempt to atone for nearly separating. Through tears, they begged me to help them avoid homelessness. They promised things would be different this time, swearing they had finally seen Jerome's true colors after he abandoned them with a ruined house and mountains of debt. They claimed they wanted to rebuild their relationship with me and would never enable him again. My mom even pulled out a handwritten letter she had been working on, listing every mistake she could remember making in my childhood and how she wanted to make amends. My dad offered to sign a legal document promising they would never give money to Jerome again if I helped them. They seemed truly desperate and remorseful. But looking at them, all I could see was every time they had chosen Jerome over me. Every time they had dismissed my feelings, enabled his destructive behavior, and helped him spread lies about me. Their current remorse felt less about recognizing their mistakes and more about having no other options left. I couldn't bring myself to trust them again, knowing it had taken complete financial ruin and abandonment by Jerome for them to finally see the truth. Final update: this will be my last update on this situation. A lot has changed in the past few months, and I want to share where things stand now. After losing their house, my parents moved in with my aunt. The bank assessed the total damage to their property at over $85,000. Between the foreclosure, their depleted retirement savings, and various loans they took out to give money to Jerome, they lost everything they spent their lives building. Several relatives stepped in to help them, offering financial support on the condition that they attend financial counseling and completely cut contact with Jerome. From what my aunt tells me, Jerome still shows up at her house occasionally, usually late at night, asking for money. He spins elaborate tales about new business opportunities or claims he's in trouble and needs help. The first few times, my parents were tempted to help him, but my aunt and uncle have been firm in enforcing boundaries. They actually installed security cameras after Jerome tried to break into their garage one night when everyone was asleep. My parents have been attending weekly financial counseling sessions with an advisor my uncle recommended. They're slowly starting to understand the extent of their enabling behavior and how it destroyed not just their own lives, but damaged our entire family. The counselor helped them create a strict budget and plan to rebuild their credit, but they'll likely never recover everything they lost to Jerome's schemes. Last month, they reached out through my aunt again. They sent a lengthy email expressing how much they miss me and detailing all the ways they now realize they hurt me throughout my life. They talked about watching old family videos and seeing clearly for the first time how they constantly pushed me aside in favor of Jerome. They said they understand why I cut contact and that they regret every time they chose him over me. They also included a formal letter of apology, taking responsibility for spreading Jerome's lies about me to the family and acknowledging how they undermined my reputation to protect him. They admitted that they only finally saw the truth when they had nothing left for him to take. The letter ended with a request to slowly rebuild our relationship, suggesting we could start with occasional emails or short phone calls. But I'm not interested in reconciliation. While I appreciate that they're finally acknowledging their mistakes, it doesn't erase the decades of damage they caused. Every time I consider giving them another chance, I remember how they supported Jerome's lies about me stealing from them. I remember how they dismissed my warnings about his behavior and accused me of jealousy. I remember how they only reached out after he had taken everything they had to give. My life has actually improved significantly since cutting contact with my family. My business is thriving, we just landed our biggest client yet, and I'm planning to open a second office. I've developed stronger relationships with friends who genuinely care about me and support my decisions. I've even started dating someone who comes from a healthy, functional family and helps me understand what normal family relationships should look like. Some relatives still pressure me to forgive my parents, saying they're old and have learned their lesson. They argue that families should stick together no matter what. But I've spent my entire life being the responsible one, cleaning up their messes while they enabled Jerome's destruction. I refuse to be drawn back into that dynamic just because they've finally run out of resources to give him. Their choices led them to this point, and now they have to live with the consequences. I genuinely hope they continue their counseling and maintain boundaries with Jerome. I hope they find peace and stability in their remaining years. But I'm done being their safety net or emotional support. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt.